All right, before we get into it today, I want to give a big shout out to Brent Lewis, newest Patreon subscriber. And if you know Brent, buy him a beer, buy him a drink. If he doesn't drink, buy him a soda or something. Buy him a pizza, right? If you want to help support the show, go to patreon.com/bigtruth. You can get more information there on how you can support the show. And if you don't want to go to Patreon and you still want to support, and we're putting out this content for free, man, I'm juggling so much stuff, but I love doing this. Do me a favor. Just leave a review wherever you listen. Click like, click subscribe, and share the show with people. Any of those things help keep us boosted up in the algorithms. And there's so many shows now vying for visibility. This helps us stay up there. Now, if you find yourself in the unfortunate situation where you find yourself in a motorcycle accident, you need to check out my homies over at gottagetglassman.com. You know, the Jeffrey Glassman injury attorneys. He's a motorcycle rider, repping for motorcycle riders, and is a bulldog on these motorcycle injury cases. Someone rear ends you at a stoplight or runs you off the side of the road because they're not paying attention. They're texting, driving, shoving a donut down their gullet as they're trying to get to work, and they don't see you in the next lane and they just drift into you. You know what I mean? Any of these situations. And I didn't know this prior, but you have up to 3 years. So if something happened 2 years ago, you can still give them a call. Easiest number in the world to remember, 617-777-7777, or jeffreyglassman.com, on Instagram at gottagetglassman. Give them a call. They will rep for you. If you need art, if you're looking for artwork to hang on your wall, right? Hang on your cell, hang on your cubicle, which is the same thing as a cell for most people. In your garage, in your she shack, in your, your dude cave or whatever, right? Your bedroom, your living room, whatever. You need to check out my homies at tattooflashcollective.com. They have prints in all sizes, posters. But you know what they have a lot of? Tattoo flash. So if you have a tattoo shop and you need to fill that, you open a new location, or you just need to refresh. You're sick of Cherry Creek flash, even though I know it's making a resurgence. You want to put up some new stuff, check out tattooflashcollective.com. They work with different tattoo artists all around the world, and it's all legit operation. There's no corporate bullshit. It's all good stuff. On the level tattoo artists working and helping other artists. Tattooflashcollective.com, on Instagram at tattooflashcollective. If you use the promo code BigTruth at checkout, you get 10% off your order. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you get even more off your order. So, membership has its privileges, right? Yeah, and if you're into motorcycles, punk rock, hardcore, weird stuff, this podcast, then you will like my motorcycle shop, Chopperhead Custom Cycles. We're located in Freetown, Mass. We're a brick and mortar motorcycle shop, right? We're not just an online fantasy lifestyle company, right? You know what I mean? Come in, hang out. We got a parts counter, a showroom, and in the back, it's a full service motorcycle shop. You need an oil change or you need a full custom bike built, we got you. If you don't live anywhere locally, and you just want to buy a hoodie or a t-shirt, we got you. Go to chopperhead.com, CHOPPAHEAD, chopperhead.com. On Instagram, Facebook, actually on Facebook, we're Chopperhead Customs with a K, but on Instagram, we're just at Chopperhead. Give us a follow. BigTruthPodcast.com for more information on the show. And if you click the store link, you can get over to our merch fulfillment company and get some cool stuff, t-shirts, hoodies, whatever, support the show. Yeah. And today's episode is a wild one. And I'm not even going to keep going on. We're just going to launch into it right now.
Sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
All right. Once again, we have liftoff. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Big Truth Podcast. And I'm stoked to have my man Nate here with me. Nate is a journalist from the Boston area, and, you know, a veteran of the punk rock and hardcore scene, but also a dude with one of the most interesting stories that has local and international appeal that I've heard in a long time. And I can't believe that I've maybe heard the name in passing, but I didn't even realize the local tie-in. So I'm going to let you get into it, Nate. But what's the story of Charles Taylor, who was a Liberian guy who was out in Massachusetts to go to school, ended up getting imprisoned in Plymouth, which is just right down the road. And then one of the only people to escape from the Plymouth. I'm just giving the overview here. Plymouth prison, and ended up becoming one of the presidents of Liberia, one of the major dudes, a major player in the Blood Diamond rings, and one of the few people to be brought up on international war crimes, and just a wild, bizarre, long, interesting web of a story, and with, like I said, with local and international ties. So, Nate, man, what's going on, bud?
Thank you for having me, man. This is the first time I've ever been on somebody's show, so I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm stoked to have you here, man. And I know you did a lot of research in this area. Before we get into it, man, let's just talk a little bit about you and your background, and let people know who you are, and how you got into journalism, and like what led you to this story, and then we'll just get into it from there.
All right. Well, by day I work in a warehouse, and my buddy and I listen to the show a fair amount. And when I heard you had the episode with Dave Wedge on, that's when I had to get a hold of you.
Oh, yeah.
I started my writing career.
Shout out to Dave Wedge, good dude, and a prolific Boston area writer.
Well, and so here's how this works for him. My introduction, I was hip to him way before I actually shook his hand and met him. When I was at Emerson, I was an intern at the Boston Phoenix.
Okay.
And for all the youngins out there, that was a newspaper that came out once a week, and it was the only way that you knew what was going on in the underground or anything in the alternative scene in Boston.
Yeah, it was like the Village Voice, or
Exactly.
every major city had that paper with all the venues, had all their listings in the back where you could find out where all the punk and hardcore or alternative shows were and whatnot. I kind of miss those. I feel like it was easier to hear about shows back then than it is on the fucking internet. You know what I mean? Like I'll see shows the next day, and I'm like, how come I didn't hear about this show? It's wild.
Well, and so I know from watching a documentary on SSD, Al was like, we put an ad in the Phoenix, and that's how we found looking for a drummer. And I was like, right there, right in my heart, man. But while I was at the Phoenix, I was working with Chris Ferrone, who is the editor-in-chief and one of the founding members of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. And so at the time, I'd taken a city desk reporting job for Metro Boston, which was the free paper that you used to get on the T. And so
for people not in the Boston area, the T is our subway transit system.
Yeah. Well, and there's a Metro Boston, there's a Metro Philly, and a Metro New York. And so writing for them was where I kind of got a nationwide angle. But at the time, I was writing for just the one in Boston, and I said, I need to go discover my voice. And my mentor, Chris Ferrone, said, go scrape the archives of the Boston Herald and look up Dave Wedge. And that was the only advice that he gave me. It was the only advice I needed. We're talking about a gifted writer here, but also a towny knucklehead. So I'm reading over all the archive stuff, and I'm like, this guy could be chewing on a hockey puck while he's writing this. He's tough as nails. Give me that. This was it. So then from there, I carried up. We kind of never lost touch, Chris Ferrone and I. And then I started at Binge. In 2018, I said, I want to go for something big. I want to go for a bigger story than just, something. I wanted to throw my weight into something huge.
Sure.
And I started looking up. All these unsolved cases and all these cold cases that a lot of them are opening up now because DNA databases are expanding.
Yeah.
I learned this when I was writing for Front Page Detective magazine. The things like 23andMe and Ancestry, those go into the DNA databases. And so there's all these cold cases from the 70s that are getting solved because of the expand of DNA data. And I said, I can't bring anything new to an unsolved or cold case that hasn't already been covered here. What other unsolveds are there? And so I started looking up prison breaks in Massachusetts. And there's a gold mine of stories within this. Like the first prison break that ever took place in the history of this country, as far as we know, happened March 30th, 1662 in Ipswich.
All right.
Who the hell knew that? The first prison break. It's the first prison break in American history.
What was it? Do you know offhand? Do you know the details, or just know that that's what it was?
I mean, 1662, they were Puritans, so he may have anything like this. Those people were no fun. Who knows?
He could have been a witch, or he could have wore his hat wrong, or
that's right, exactly. He could have worn his fucking hat wrong, and they'd be like, hang him. They hung people for less, and then in the 1800s, 1870, there's this prolific burglar named Worcester Sam Paris. And he was a bank job guy. He was a safe cracker. He was all these, he did 4 huge jobs in 1 year and came out with however much money that came out, blah, blah, blah. He was arrested in Worcester and broke out and died a free man.
So then he got away. He
got away. He busted out of some prison in 1872, and for all we know, he died an old man in Kansas City, Missouri. But no, that's not a celebrated crook. If anybody in the world needed a hero more than the people of Worcester, here's this guy. He needs a statue. We need to change it to the Worcester Sam Paris Palladium. This guy's great. He's one of the biggest, he was one of the most prolific burglars in the Northeast in this time. Yeah. So I'm probably going to visit that story after I'm done with this one. Going down this list of prison, anything jail-related oddities in Massachusetts, I come across something that says the president of Liberia escaped from prison in Massachusetts in 1985. That's all it said.
Yeah.
And so then so who the hell is the president of Liberia? What the hell is he doing here? So look into it, and he broke out of Plymouth County. I grew up in Hingham, South Shore as they come. My hobbies at the time in 2018 were going to AA meetings, training at Boston Boxing and Fitness, shout out Ed Lavash, going to punk and hardcore shows, and writing for Front Page Detective magazine. The law of averages says I know somebody who was locked up in Plymouth in 1984 who can tell me about this.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it was a family gathering where I got hip to this. One of my brother-in-laws, who's considerably older than me, he's about 20 years clean, sober, and removed from a life of crime. But back in the day, he used to rip and run with some just primo losers. And real dirtballs. And one of them happened to be, he talked at length with this bizarre man named Charles Taylor, who was brought into prison for reasons they didn't understand, as he was not charged with any crimes here. And he was stuck in that jail because the government that was looking for him pretty much collapsed. And that's where this story begins. If you want right now, you pop that clip about him introducing himself, let's hear it from the man himself.
The first one, right? Charles Taylor. Yeah. All right, hold on. Let me get that lined up here.
Can you give the court your full name, please?
My name is Dr. Charles Ganke Taylor, the 21st president of the Republic of Liberia. I tried to enter the business school at Harvard. I could not, so the next best business school I could get into, because my grades were good, was Bentley. That's Bentley, Bentley College, in a town just outside of Boston called Waltham. That's Waltham, Massachusetts.
And this is his testimony from when he was giving his testimony, or from the court when he was doing
In the
he was brought up on
International Criminal Court, correct.
brought up for war crimes. Okay.
Yeah, he's in the International Criminal Court. It was called the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and so he was born in 1948, and he came to Massachusetts in the mid 70s to go to Bentley, as I said there. And while he was there, he got involved with this this group of Liberian Americans. At this time, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York had the highest concentration of people from Liberia in the U.S. And so they have a dictator who is starting to really crack down over in Liberia. And so all these expats are raising money and a lot of support for revolution, or if and so the president of Liberia came to the United States in 1979 to speak at the UN, and Charles Taylor led this group that was arrested because they kept interrupting his speech. And that's where the world first took note of him, I'd say, because he had the balls to be running up the halls of the UN, like shouting at this man. And so this group is making a name for itself. And then there is a riot in the streets of Monrovia. And that's the clip about the gun buy. I don't know if we're, hang on, let me see. Where am I in this here? Oh, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, bro.
Okay.
Do you want to make a note, like we're like to roll it back?
Oh no, we're just live. We're not live, like broadcasting live, but we'll just come back. We'll circle around. So
okay.
So
in post production?
No, it's fine. We'll just keep it going. So he came to Boston to go to school. Then he got involved. Then while he was in school, there was a dictator in Liberia, or Sierra Leone, or Liberia.
Liberia this time.
And then that president comes, and he's with a faction of Liberians that are protesting him, and they're interrupting his speech
at the United Nations.
Yeah. Okay.
But at the same time, Charles Taylor's also working in a factory in South Boston.
Yeah.
And he describes being in Southie in the 70s. That's the second clip that I.
Okay. Yeah. He's talking about Roxbury in Boston. Hold on 1 second. I'll play that. Let me get that queued up here. There you go.
I was living in an area of Boston called Roxbury.
Roxbury.
That's a predominantly black neighborhood in Boston.
How did you finance yourself through Bentley College?
I was lucky to get a job with a plastic company. It was a very nice man in a very, at that time, bad part of Boston. It's called South Boston. This was at the height of the school desegregation in the Massachusetts area.
Pause you for a moment, because I'm looking at the transcript. What part of Boston did you say?
South, South. South.
Thank you.
Obviously, that British guy hadn't seen any of the South Boston wasn't as big on the scene yet.
It hadn't been gentrified yet.
Yeah, he hadn't seen The Departed or anything. No. I was just playing around. But so he's living in Roxbury, working in Southie, at the height of when Southie was like seriously more Irish and a little more segregated, and so he was transversing worlds, even though they were only like a mile and a half apart.
Well, and this was during the busing crisis.
Yeah, so that's like at the height of like when height of racial tension.
Yeah. And I mean, even though South Boston has been gentrified to hell today, there's still only one place that I've ever seen a bar fight take place while the sun was still up, and that was Southie. So
I've seen fights happen at the St. Patrick's Day parade in the middle of the day on the streets.
oh no! Barring that, no, this was just on like a Sunday, and the Patriots had a 1:00 game. Forget that. That's a given.
Yeah.
So there's a riot in the streets of Monrovia in 1979.
My ignorance here, Monrovia is the
capital of Liberia.
Okay, that's right.
And this is where the seeds of revolution are planted. The government raises the price of food, specifically rice, and so people take to the streets. Protest turns into a riot. The army opens fire. National Guard opens fire on a crowd, and their response from the U.S., these expats, is the third clip about the handguns.
Okay, hold on. Let me get. So this is how he's getting revolutionized.
Oh, this is where, they're raising money. They're raising they're gaining their outreach for support on an international level. But after the riot is when things are pushed too far. Okay. And this is
that clip.
Yep.
Did you ever have any brushes with any of the American authorities?
Oh, yes, I did.
Such as?
I was arrested by the FBI in 1979.
What for?
Following the riot in Monrovia and the killing of peaceful, unarmed citizens, tempers flare. And it's decided then that the government is shooting people on the streets, so the citizens should have an opportunity to shoot back. Bad thinking, but that was the time. So there was an attempt to try to buy some handguns to send back to Liberia to these unarmed citizens to defend themselves, not knowing that the FBI had been listening to us, and they sent in an informer who passed himself off as someone that had handguns, and they meet to buy the guns. I go back to Boston, and the FBI arrest me.
Okay.
Did you have?
Yeah. So kind of how it works, right? Where the FBI kind of gets involved and sets up a little sting.
Yeah, no, they've been doing sting operations for gun buys forever, but they couldn't tie Charles Taylor directly to that buy, but they knew that he was the money man. They knew he was bankrolling it.
Yeah.
So the government of Liberia starts investigating him and determines that he's been embezzling over $1 million between Liberia and the United States.
Embezzling from where?
From Liberia, from government agency. Like his friends in the government are writing him checks through like the finance ministry, or through any other, ministry of this, ministry of that. They're just cutting him small checks again and again. Was the intent to have him fund like procuring guns and stuff for that revolution like type guns for that response, but really just trying to generate international support. For an overthrow. There's a lot of groups trying to overthrow the dictator. Charles Taylor's happens to be the successful one, but there's it's a staggering list that try to test this government before it goes.
So when he came over here, he already had like contacts in the government and stuff over there, and then he came here to go to school, and then so he was kind of staying in touch with everybody, and then as that situation got tenser, he was getting more radicalized, and
he had direct contact with these sort of young people at the University of Monrovia. Everybody who I've talked to or read about, Charles Taylor is Captain Charisma. Everybody loves the guy. He's polite, but he's also like a dude. He can yuck it up and he can talk serious business, but he has that magnetism to him.
Even in these clips so far, he doesn't sound like what you think he's going to sound like. Like, this is a guy getting brought up on war crimes, and he's just like, yeah, man, he's blah, blah, blah. So just so matter of fact about blase about everything.
Yeah, me and my friends, we had this bad idea. We were going to send a bunch of revolvers back home so our friends could go, like, assassinate people and overthrow the government.
Yeah.
And so the Liberian government, they're hot on his embezzlement trail. They file charges against him. The United States and Liberia have longstanding diplomatic ties that go back to the 1800s. We honor this arrest warrant. We don't want this guy in our country. So we take him into custody. The FBI and the U.S. Marshals, they go down to Roxbury, they get him. And he is to be held in the Plymouth County House of Corrections for 60 days pending extradition, which is standard procedure. But that's not what happens. Another group tries to overthrow the Liberian government, and they're unsuccessful, but they get very close. And so the Liberian government loses interest in Charles Taylor completely. And all of a sudden, we can't just put him on a plane and fly him back to Liberia. There might not be anybody at the airport to come get him. So now we have this man in our custody. He's not charged with any crimes in the United States. He's not a U.S. citizen, so he doesn't have constitutional rights. We know that he's part of international crime syndicates, so we're not going to offer him asylum. What the hell do we do with him? And so that 60-day stay turns into a 1.5 to 2 year long bid. And so that is where my guy, Doc, comes into play. And I don't want to make light of whatever happens after Charles Taylor escapes from prison, because the crimes against humanity that he was convicted of are absolutely appalling. However, there's nobody in the world who tells a story quite like a Massachusetts townie scumbag type guy. And so my guy, Doc, tells me that the moment they bring Charles Taylor into the Plymouth County House of Corrections, he is telling everyone that he is going to break out of this prison. He is going to go back to Liberia. He is going to lead a revolution. He's going to liberate his people from the chains of poverty and oppression. And he's telling this to the prisoners. He's telling it to the guards. He's telling it to the supervisors. He's telling it to the kitchen staff. Anyone that'll listen, and not one of them has any idea what this man is talking about. They think he's a fucking crazy person at first. But like I said, Captain Charisma, very serious, but also can chuckle with the boys, and they end up having a barrel of laughs with him. So he's got to explain to them who he is and what the hell he's doing there. So he's got to start light with them, baby steps. He says, I am from Liberia. I'm Liberian. And so by the end of the week, everybody thinks he's a librarian. And so Doc's telling me, he says, you've never been locked up. I said, no. He says, well, it's jail, not Yale. And that's a very eloquent way of saying these guys are morons. And so they're asking, they're trying to figure out who he is. And not too long into his stay, Charles Taylor's allies in Liberia are mailing him to the jailhouse like documents and newspaper clippings and some maps. And so one of these guys in Plymouth picks up one of the maps and goes, hey, fellas, get a load of this. Liberia, it's a real place after all. Like,
Yeah.
These dudes have no idea. So they still have no idea. But time starts to keep going. He starts getting more and more material mailed to him. And these maps are starting to get a lot more detailed, as in like X marks the spot. And that's where the guerrilla rebel army is training out in the jungle. Like nowhere near civilization. And little by little, they start to realize that this guy might actually be for real. And so now they're starting to dig into this. Like,
isn't it wild though? And I'm not trying to interrupt you here, but like this guy's getting maps with like things marked on it.
Oh, they're coming.
Like,
yeah.
and it's not going through like it just they don't take it serious enough back then where they're just letting that, oh yeah, here's this map with all this information, here you go, buddy. Like they're not taking note of any of that. Like it's not intercepted by like FBI or anybody on like the warden or anything, you know what I mean? But
No, because
bananas.
they think it's all not, they don't know what to think of it, because like they are waiting to hear about his extradition, and so that's federal, so they can't bring it to them. That has completely stalled out. And locally, we don't care. If you're not going to lead a revolution in America, specifically in Plymouth County, they really don't give a shit one way or the other.
Yeah.
You want to go play revolution in a country no one's heard of? Go ahead. But the guys are starting to realize more and more, like, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. And so Charles Taylor's given these lectures about the history of West Africa and the politics of Liberia, and he's giving speeches on revolutionary theory and Pan-African unification theory. And there's a couple guys in there who they was in the army before they ended up in the can. And he's talking hardware and firepower and strategy. And yeah, they're really starting to realize, like, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. And so he was given one of these lectures, and he's telling these guys, he keeps telling them, there are these 200 guerrilla rebel soldiers. They're training out in the jungle. These are my soldiers. They're preparing for my arrival. And as soon as I bust out of here. And so one of these guys, these idiots, just raises his hand and says, you know, Charlie, they got gorillas at the Franklin Park Zoo. Why don't you take them with you? Because nobody knows what this guy's talking about.
Yeah. That's his Boston. That's his like seven. It's Boston as it gets right there.
That's it right there. Like, and then one day, a couple of weeks later, they wake up and he's gone. And him and four other crooks, they sawed through the bars with these hacksaws. They tied the bed sheets together, and they went down the side of the building, just ran out the prison. And four of them, they went nowhere. They got busted days later, but Charles Taylor was long gone. We don't know how.
So yeah, he never talked about how he got out or like how he got to Liberia.
He flirts with it. He says he claims that he was he claims that he has no idea who the guys were that picked him up in the government trucks and drove him to the airport. And I don't know who let him out. I never figured that out. I never really went looking for it, because ultimately, if they knew what was coming next, I don't think they would have let him out at all.
Yeah. Because it's amazing though, because like 70s and 80s, you could get away with so much more. Like there wasn't like no fly lists, like, or like internet or like fast paced stuff. So you could get out of jail and you could still take a flight. You know what I mean? Like how did you get on a flight out of the country? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if you had it lined up, so it was like if you had like a 3-hour window, 3.5-hour window, you're gone.
Yeah. There's nothing instantaneous.
You didn't have to like take your shoes. You don't have to take your shoes off or any of that shit. Yeah. No, you could, if somebody had that ticket waiting for you, 3-hour window, you're gone.
Yeah, you didn't have to show ID, I don't think, back then. You just had your ticket. Here's my ticket, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you may have to show a license or something, but I mean, if you're about to get out of the country because people just let you out of jail, so there's a way.
So someone had a fake license for you or something.
No, it's even crazier. He says this, actually. He says that one of the guards verified his passport. Now, he doesn't offer any proof or anything beyond just saying that, but he says one of the prison guards verified my passport. I have no idea if that's true.
Yeah.
But that's what he claims. But there's a lot of stuff he says throughout this trial that's it's so riddled with contradictions, and he's so nonchalant about it that I don't know. You never get the whole story out of this guy.
Yeah.
But he makes his way across the Atlantic Ocean to Libya, and he is training these soldiers with Muammar Gaddafi, the former dictator of Libya.
Yeah.
And they invade Liberia in 1989, and they're called the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, and they absolutely obliterated the capital city, blew it all to hell.
So what was the time span? When did he break out? What year was it?
September 15th, 1985.
So 85, he breaks out, he goes to Libya, is training his guys there for a few years, and then like 4 years later they invade and take over.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect math on that. About 4 years. And then it's guerrilla warfare, and so he is just the biggest and baddest warlord there is. But these guys were fighting with armies that were like 20% of them. There were kids under the age of 18.
Yeah, that's one thing I did hear about him, that he was like one of the first to lead. Like when you hear about the African like child soldiers, that's attributed a lot to him.
He was the first one to do it on the scale that this took place in. And so in 1991, there was a revolution in Sierra Leone, which is right on the border of Liberia. Charles Taylor he's financing a military group called the Revolutionary United Front of Sierra Leone. And they conquer the mountains that are filled with diamonds. On the east side of the country, there is this mountain range where 80% of the De Beers diamonds, anything on the market that has a De Beers note, it comes from Sierra Leone. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, and the people who are harvesting these diamonds are 12-year-old kids with no shoes on digging in a mud pit. It's the reason why laboratory-grown diamonds have that they're now extremely popular.
Sure.
But that's the genesis of this, is Charles Taylor and his conquest of West Africa.
And people who've heard the term blood diamonds, this is what it's referring to.
The movie with Leonardo DiCaprio takes place in Sierra Leone, and there's a scene where people are chopping people's arms off, and that is the calling card of the Revolutionary United Front. They would just round people up, chop off their arms, and leave them in the middle of the main city to say, stay out of these mountains. And it worked for like 15 years. That's just one of the crimes against humanity that they were guilty of, but they chopped thousands of people's arms off. That was their
calling card.
Yeah, it was. That's how you knew it was them. And there's testimony of people in The Hague who were missing their arms, and I read the transcript. I didn't listen to it. It's a little, at some point there's too much, but eventually other warlords just kept piling on and taking shots at him, and finally they knocked him off the throne of blood. And so he went into exile in 2003, I believe, and then went to The Hague in 2005, if my math's right.
So he was running Liberia and Sierra Leone, or at least the mountain region of the diamond mountain region of Sierra Leone.
The Diamond Mountains.
From 89 to early 2000s.
Yes, 89 to 2003, and in 97 he was elected president of Liberia, and we use the term elected very, very loosely. But
sure.
And so when he went to The Hague.
But before we get into that, just to talk about that election more. So prior to that, he had been running the country as more of like a dictator, and then they just held they were like, oh, let's be a democracy, and they held elections.
International pressure.
Okay.
Mounted on them pretty much. They it took the world a long time to realize what was going on in this part of the world because everybody stayed out, because people, these atrocities were getting laid out. So nobody was talking about this. They were just staying put and hoping that they would survive.
And I don't think people understand the brutality of that. And like when you said other warlords were trying to take the crown, like those fights aren't pretty. Like, you know what I mean?
No.
Like arms getting cut off is actually gets lower on the scale than some of the atrocities that take place during those fights.
Well, and it was block by block with teenagers carrying AK-47s, and the pictures of the aftermath of these wars, like there's a lot of fucking bullet holes in a lot of fucking buildings after this, because but it was the child soldier aspect of this too, and it gets tough digging into shit like that, because
Sure.
8-year-olds were gunning people down.
Let me ask you this real quick, because this is like something, just a question, and you might have insight into it or not. He did run things for a long time, like 89 to early 2000s. And he did go into it trying to overturn an oppressive government, then in turn at some point became the oppressor himself. Or did he rule there? Did people like him? Was he like a benevolent kind of dictator? Or like, how did it go? Like how do you go from being like, hey man, the government's screwing us, let's overthrow them, to like, all right, and now, now he overthrows this government and is ruling mercilessly. You know what I mean?
I think as soon as you have unlimited access to blood diamonds, you stop. You don't think about anything else. And that was something that I read about in a biography of his, where this man was trading in blood diamonds, and the road to the village he grew up in is still not paved. Like, this is we're talking about a country the size of New Jersey that doesn't have 500 miles of paved roads. So like, there's nothing benevolent about this. It was just, the man was trading in blood diamonds. I think your soul goes right out as soon as you.
So Greed took over, and any lofty ideals kind of went out the window, so. and the diamonds changed the game with that.
I think so. I think everybody is a virtuous revolutionary until you see an uncut diamond and realize that you have a unlimited access to it. Yeah, no, you anything good about you just leaves your body right in there. Yeah,
because it'd be interesting. Like, has anyone asked him about that in any of this testimony? Like when did? Like what happened? You know what I mean? Because it's like, that's a transition.
He was a businessman. He was a businessman.
He was a businessman. Yeah.
Yep. He was a businessman. It was never personal.
That's what he went to school for, right? He was going to school for business.
Economics and business. Yeah. It was never. His testimony is like, there were no atrocities committed in Liberia, but the atrocities that were committed in Liberia were committed by other people. It's like, sure they were, but there
were no atrocities, but if they were, it wasn't by us. Yeah.
The one, like, the reason that I don't really care to even call the guy, if I even could, is because there's a quote. He says, there were no child soldiers in Liberia, but the child soldiers that did fight went back to school, and they were the most disciplined students, and blah blah blah. And it's like, what school? You blew the entire city off the face of the earth. There's no school.
I just like how he starts it with like denying it existed. He goes, but the ones that did, and it's like, all right, you just contradict. It's like so contradictory.
And it's a straight face. There's not even like a breath in between the two sentences. He just says it flat out. And you're like, okay, this guy's a fucking lunatic. Like, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, psychopath or sociopath.
Yeah, exactly. Like he had time to think about that answer,
Yeah.
It's so eventually, he becomes the first leader of a sovereign nation to be tried and convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity since Nazis at the Nuremberg here.
Yeah. So how did it come about? How did his downfall come about? And, you know, like, how did he, like, what set it off where finally people were like, we got to get this guy out? And then they catch, and then, like, how did they catch him?
Eventually people started to get wind of the fact that there were, you know, hundreds and hundreds of armless people. And, everybody kind of sort of knew who he was, especially in the diamond trading area. It's kind of the same. It's a similar theme where whoever was running the company that was doing the mining, they couldn't go running to the international community and say, these terrible people have like child soldiers because they have children digging in the mines. So it's like, you're just as guilty. Like they couldn't go for help because they're doing terrible, like unspeakable acts too. Yeah. So they had to just sort of accept the fact that this man was going to be a powerhouse in the area. Liberia, for example, has the largest private landowner in Liberia is Firestone Tire. Liberia is the largest producer of rubber on the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. And so Charles Taylor took over that plantation, and he forced the Firestone executives to acknowledge him as the president of Liberia, and that's what led to the elections. But Firestone couldn't call for help because they were using slave labor to harvest rubber. So it's not like they could call up and say, oh my God, this warlord is using slave labor to make rubber. Yeah. They were doing the same thing. They would be, you know, self-snitching. Yeah. So it's funny how it goes too. Like obviously this guy is the guy, you know what I mean? He's the one that's doing all, you know, is heading up all this stuff. But there's so many other people complicit in it that probably didn't get brought up on any charges because they had some protections because of being a multinational corporations or whatever. Like, you know, certain people see justice and certain people never see, are outside, you know, outside of the realm of any accountability. That's what I think happens when you have unlimited access to these resources. I think you go from being an idealist and a virtuous revolutionary to somebody who's just like, cash money, let's go. But I mean, the bigger issue is that there was definitely people that were aware of all these atrocities going on for decades, and no one said anything because everyone was making money off it, and you know, greed overruled basic humanity in that aspect. And so, like, if people from Firestone, which is an American corporation but also an international corporation, you know, with branches everywhere, and you know, the De Beer mining company and whatever. There was all kinds of people that knew about what was going on, but no one said anything because they're all making money. So they're all complicit as well. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, they should be brought up on aiding and abetting, but that's never going to happen because they have they let him fall, but no one else probably got any ramifications from that. You can still buy diamonds. You can still buy Firestone tires. You know what I mean? Well, and there hasn't been that much. I don't think anybody can actually push back against something like rubber, but no, I know. But what I mean is, I'm just saying, like, this stuff, like, you couldn't get away with this in like a first or second world country, right? But in a third world country on a different thing, all this bullshit's going on, and in a time frame like pre-internet, but also during the internet. But like it took, you know, I don't know who finally said enough's enough, but like, you know, there was a lot of people covering it up or like hushing it for a long time because everyone was making money. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that they should be brought up on the same charges, but, you know, fuck all these companies that, you know, were, you know, like looking the other way as, you know, young kids are getting conscripted into being soldiers, or people getting their arms cut off, you know what I mean? Or like other horrors going on, you know what I mean? It's just an all around shitty situation, you know what I mean? And it just shows you how fucked up the world is, you know what I mean? How greed corrupts, absolutely, you know? Absolutely. And the way that there have been hit back, because it's not through legal channels, but laboratory grown diamonds, the popularity of that is on the up and up. And this is why. Yeah. You can grow a diamond in a laboratory and, you know, a 6-year-old with no shoes on doesn't have to pull it out of a mud pit. And so, but like diamonds are not worth anything really. They are in a controlled market where only so many are released on a yearly basis.
Well, well, that's what I don't think a lot of people know about. There's way more diamonds than we let on. The only reason why they're so expensive is because they, like you just said, it's a controlled release. They only let a certain amount out, so there's a perceived scarcity of them or a perceived rarity of them. But from what the word is out there, is that there's plenty. There's no shortage, and it would be absolutely worthless. Like if you really knew how much was out there.
They would be. There's a vault that's the size of several city blocks in the city of Antwerp, and that's where all these diamonds are sitting. But like, if the amount of diamonds that were pulled out of the ground on an annual basis went straight to the market, they'd be worth nothing.
Yeah. It'd be like a garnet or something, or one of those like just like weird, like, all right, it's a nice stone, but it ain't really worth much. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Like it's amazing because the controlled distribution of it makes them high value, but it's a completely inflated value.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, So how did his little house of cards finally collapse, and how did they get him?
They got him because he got too big for his own britches, really. But people started here, like the word about these atrocities started crossing international borders, and people came to realize that he really was just a gangster running these two countries. And then there were some warlords who took some pretty good shots at him, and they knocked him off. But what really broke this thing down was this. The women of Liberia took to the streets in protest, and they went on a sex strike. They basically said, you're not getting any action until this war comes to an end. And they stopped 15 years worth of war in like 4.5 months.
War between rival warlord factions?
Warlords, factions. Because they would pop up every now and again. Everybody wanted a shot at the throne.
Yeah.
And the women of this country they said, we've had enough of this shit. None of you are getting laid until this war comes to an end. And it worked. And then they brought this to Sierra Leone and they educated the women in that country about this, and it worked there too. And that was the silver lining in learning about all these atrocities was the women of these countries, they stopped horrific warfare for like a decade and a half. They stopped it without firing a single shot. And so that was the silver lining of learning about all the stuff that all the atrocities that took place there. But eventually Charles Taylor was convicted of war crimes against humanity, and he was sentenced to 50-year sentence, but that's life for somebody at his age.
How old was he when he was brought to charges?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure there.
Yeah, no problem.
I'd have to look that up.
Was there like, how did he get caught? Was there like a manhunt for him, or did he surrender?
There was an international manhunt for him. And he was in exile in Nigeria for a couple of years, and then Interpol came down on him, and that was that. But they had to surrender him to The Hague. They had to establish a special court of Sierra Leone, and it took, it was all said and done. This was like 2003 to 2012. It took a long time to convict this man.
Yeah. What were the war crimes he was charged with? Like the child soldiers,
the child soldiers, the trade of blood diamonds, the lopping people's arms off. There was a lot of sanctioned like rape and sexual abuse stuff that was really tough to read about.
Sure.
And then a lot of it really was just a lot of international trade of illicit goods like these blood diamonds for, he was trading with former KGB agents who were bringing him stockpiles of AKs from these military bases that were in the former Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they were just abandoned. So they just have shitloads of weapons caches ready to go.
Yeah, so he's trading diamonds for AKs and weaponry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was like keeping him on top, keeping him armed.
Yeah.
I had this other clip that you had pulled, the Houdini episode. Is that about his jailbreak? Is that about his jailbreak?
Hit it.
All right, yeah. Let's just hear from him, because now that you know more about the guy, listen to him talking as he's talking at his own trial. You know what I mean? It's just the calm, cool, and collected, like you said, charismatic guy.
Firstly, I'm arrested in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm taken to the Plymouth County House of Correction.
And where's that?
That's way outside of Boston. I would say I can't really calculate.
In which state?
Massachusetts.
Now, it's that Houdini episode that I want to talk to you about now. How did you get out of jail, Mr. Taylor, without a Monopoly type get out of jail card?
Oh, I cut off there. Yeah, he's just like whatever, man.
He's completely nonchalant about it.
Yeah,
and that is just sort of how he's described, as this cool, collective, and like really charming, sort of harmless sounding guy.
Yeah.
And instead, he's this mass murdering lunatic.
So you wrote about this, and how was it received? Like when you started publishing the articles on this, like did people not realize that this guy, because a lot of people have heard of this guy or heard of the story, but maybe didn't realize he had Massachusetts ties and was operating out here, like how was it received locally?
Well, a lot of people had no idea who I was talking about. And it is received well, but it's a long and complicated series of articles, and most people are very busy, and shit is crazy in the world today. So I don't begrudge anybody who hasn't read through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's such a wild story, though, man. It's so, you know what I mean?
It's something that keeps giving. Each time I feel like I've come to a conclusion, or at least a part where I can like pigeonhole and go, pivot, do something else, I'll come across something and just be like, son of a bitch.
Yeah, gotta get back on it. Yeah.
Yep. But the audio, the clips you're playing there, there's so much about him being in Massachusetts in the 70s, and him and his buddies really becoming revolutionaries and activists. And there were people who left Massachusetts to go fight with him.
Yeah. And he had that charisma where he could recruit people and get people behind him.
His second in command was a guy who grew up in Dorchester, he grew up in Dorchester, went to Boston University, went to Suffolk, a well-educated guy, but he, as soon as revolution was starting to catch fire, he was up for it, and next thing you know, he's second in command of Charles Taylor's army.
Was he U.S. born or Liberian born?
I don't think he was born here. I think he came here at a young age.
Okay, but he had mostly grown up in the States.
Yeah, but there was this... he had this sort of like, he had that pride of being Liberian. Sure. I guess it really did resonate with him. There was a lot of energy around getting this dictator out of power there in the 70s, but he was replaced by a dictator in the 80s, and he was replaced by Charles Taylor. So it really is a throne of blood scenario. There were guys but like everybody was taking a shot at the throne. So it really, like, Charles Taylor's army was just one of at least 8 that I know of, like, that I read about. There were probably more.
It's a wild area, man. It's just crazy. Just the whole like, let's overthrow this dictator because they're, because they're being, because they're being dictators, and you know what I mean. And then they become what they overthrew. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and it's like absolute power corrupts absolutely.
yeah. In a lawless area where you can get away with it. You know what I mean? Plus with all that money around. You know what I mean? Like.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was harder to get information in and out of places at that time.
It didn't have the infrastructure, and we didn't have the instantaneous. It wasn't like today where you're seeing video clips from Gaza or from Ukraine, or you know what I mean.
Oh hell yeah!
Yeah,
no, nothing like that at all.
It would the kibosh would have put down a lot quicker, I think, if they had the technology that we have now.
Absolutely, but like there wasn't too many people that even knew that like Firestone had been in Liberia, and they started their operation there in 1929. But now you can see a picture of this plantation from a satellite on Google Earth. But outside of that, nobody who the hell knew, who would know?
People didn't even know Liberia was a country. So it was like, never mind what's going on.
I mean, that's what we learned from the Rhodes Scholars in Plymouth, is that nobody knew where this, nobody knew where this guy was talking about. So, and then you got a country like Sierra Leone that was basically a giant mining colony. Yeah. And that's really all it was just a place to go and dig diamonds. It didn't have things like really government infrastructure. But no one would know. Who would know?
Crazy, man. I know. I can't wait to see what else you do with this story. In the meantime, are the articles that you originally published, are those online anywhere, or is there a place where people can get them?
They're available through binge.news. But if you look up Charles Taylor, Massachusetts, if you Google that, you'll find this.
And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So if someone's listening to this while they're driving, they can look it up later. If you want to send me shoot me a text with the actual link, and I'll put the link up to all your articles and whatnot. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, or like what's the best way people can find out more information about you and what you're up to?
Probably Instagram at Nate Homan Boston.
Yeah, and I'll have that up on there as well.
All right. Yeah, that's the tale of Charles Taylor so far.
Yeah, ongoing. He's still around. So
he's still alive. So the story continues.